was a guy in the NBA who never needed to shout or make exaggerated gestures to dominate. He'd step onto the court with the same face as always, as if nothing mattered, and suddenly he'd destroy you. He was a silent assassin, a sniper who could set an entire game on fire with just a few touches of the ball. Ben Gordon was that player who turned every shot into a knife to the opponent, and he did it without raising his voice, without provoking, with that calm that unsettled everyone. In 2009, he reached his peak, averaging 24 points per game in the playoffs, leading the Bulls to one of the most spectacular series in history against the Celtics. It seemed like he had it all: talent, mentality, and the respect of a league where surviving is already a miracle. But what no one imagined was that just 6 years later, he would be out of basketball, not because of a lack of skill, not because of age, but because his own mind betrayed him. This is the story of how one of the most lethal shooters the NBA has ever seen went from being a hero in Chicago to getting lost in a battle that wasn't played on the court but inside his head. Before becoming a silent executioner in the NBA, Ben Gordon had already made it clear in college that he was built for big moments. He joined the UConn Huskies during a golden era, surrounded by talent, but it was he who earned the reputation of a cold-blooded closer. The team had Emeka Okafor dominating the paint, a defensive anchor who would later be drafted into the NBA. But when the clock ran down and hands started shaking, everyone knew who should get the ball. Gordon was the dagger that decided games. In the 2004 March Madness, Ben averaged over 20 points per game and carried on his back a team that was already built to compete. In the Final Four against Duke, one of those historic rivals, he scored 23 points with the calm of someone strolling through a practice session. And in the final against Georgia Tech, when every possession was worth gold, he showed up again, 21 points and 3-pointers that nailed the final coffin shut. That championship wasn't just a title for UConn, it was the confirmation that Gordon had that special gene, the one belonging to players who breathe differently when the whole world is running out of air. They called him Gentle Ben because he had that face of a calm, almost bored guy who seemed disconnected from everything, but inside he was pure electricity. The contrast was brutal. On the outside he looked made of ice, but inside he was burning, and when he raised the ball to shoot, that deceptive calm turned into surgical execution. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch, didn't blink. His body language said, "This is routine," even though what he was doing was blowing up opponents on the biggest stage of college basketball. That tournament catapulted him straight to the NBA. He wasn't a prospect to develop, wasn't a project for the future. He was a scorer ready to start from day one. And that, in an ecosystem where most players take years to adjust, already put him in a different league. Ben Gordon left UConn not only as a champion, but as a guy who had proven he could shine when it mattered most. And that trait, that cold blood, would follow him to Chicago. In the 2004 draft, the Chicago Bulls selected him with the 3rd overall pick. It was a young team, full of loose pieces and raw talent, but coming out of an endless desert. 6 straight seasons without making the playoffs since Jordan's retirement. The city needed a new reference point, someone who could give the team its identity back. And without even looking for it, that guy turned out to be a rookie with a poker face and a killer's confidence. From day one, Ben Gordon made it clear that he wasn't someone to wait on for the future. He was ready to make an impact right now. Coming off the bench, he could ignite a game in seconds with bursts of impossible 3-pointers. He averaged 15 points with 40% from beyond the arc and became the only rookie in history to win the 6th Man of the Year award. A feat that speaks for itself because he didn't just come in to play minutes, he came in to change the Bulls' fate. He quickly earned a nickname that described him better than any statistic, Mr. Fourth Quarter. Because if there was a moment when he came alive, it was in the clutch. He was the league's top scorer in several fourth quarters that season, becoming the man who demanded the ball when everyone else hid. In a team with young promises like Kirk Hinrich or Luol Deng, Gordon took on that role without blinking. He was the executioner Chicago hadn't had in years. And the most surprising part, he did it standing just 6 feet 1 inch in a league of giants. He didn't have the physique of a dominant shooting guard, but he had a technical arsenal that made up for everything. Step backs, quick pull-ups off the dribble, shots over much taller defenders, it didn't matter. Every one of his attempts seemed designed to silence arenas. In just one season, Chicago felt something it had long forgotten, the feeling that when the game got tight, there was a player capable of closing it. What Ben Gordon did in Chicago wasn't a rookie illusion. From his early years, he started delivering nights that seemed impossible to replicate. In his second season against the Washington Wizards, he reached a historic milestone. 9 3-pointers without a single miss, a perfect 9 for 9, placing him alongside the greatest shooters of all time. And as if that weren't enough, he sealed it with a game-winning 3 from the corner, showing that pressure didn't crush him, it fueled him. And if there's one game that defines what Gordon was, it's that 2006 duel against Milwaukee. Michael Redd was on fire and finished with 52 points, but the night was stolen by Chicago shooting guard. Gordon dropped 48 points, 20 of them coming in the fourth quarter alone, erasing an 18-point deficit almost single-handedly. It was the definition of what he represented, a player capable of flipping a game in a flash as if he had a switch only he knew how to turn on. That ability didn't stop in the regular season. In the 2006 playoffs against Miami, Gordon stood toe-to-toe with Dwyane Wade and averaged 21 points per game. The Bulls ended up losing, but Gordon proved he could produce in the postseason on the stage where the good are separated from the truly great. That's where he cemented his identity. He wasn't just a stat patter, he was someone who wanted the ball when the game was burning. His reputation was built on runs that felt like science fiction. It wasn't unusual to see him hit 5, 6, even 7 threes in a row, igniting the United Center and giving fans back that feeling of watching someone special. And all of it with a detail that made it even more epic. He was only 6 feet 1 inch. In a league of giants, Gordon carved his path through skill, confidence, and a cold-blooded calm that set him apart. On a young team that was starting to dream about being contenders again, Gordon became the symbol of that hope. Each one of those legendary nights didn't just boost his averages, around 20 points per game with 41% from 3, it also fueled the belief that Chicago was back, and it was thanks to a shooting guard who seemed born to turn every game into a test of nerves. After 2 seasons shining as one of the most feared shooters in the league, Chicago wanted to lock Ben Gordon in. On the table was a $50 million contract, stability, security, and the chance to become the face of a franchise trying to rebuild after years of darkness. For most players, signing would have been an obvious move, but Gordon didn't see it that way. He was coming off a season averaging over 20 points, delivering historic scoring runs, and earning the nickname Mr. Fourth Quarter. In his mind, he hadn't reached his ceiling yet. He believed he could be the first option on a championship team, and that accepting that deal would be selling himself short. He turned it down, convinced he was worth more. And that was the exact moment when destiny began to twist. Because while Gordon was betting on himself, the NBA and even the Bulls saw him differently. Yes, he was a lethal scorer, but many in the media and Chicago's front office doubted he could carry a team on his own, and the context didn't help. The franchise was in chaos, with coaches coming and going, young players struggling to develop, and a project that felt stuck. There were no guarantees that Chicago was anywhere near competing for a title. The 2007 to 2008 season confirmed those doubts. The Bulls finished with a losing record and missed the playoffs. Gordon was still the team's top scorer, averaging 18 points per game, but it wasn't enough. The multi-million-dollar offer vanished, and what remained was a 1-year deal worth $6 million, a chasm compared to what he had once been offered. That was a harsh blow to his career. A decision born from absolute confidence in his own talent ended up leaving him exposed to instability, forcing him to play year by year. What could have been the foundation of a personal era in Chicago turned into an open wound. And at that point, the future seemed filled with more doubts than certainties. When everything seemed to be falling apart in Chicago, a name appeared that would change the story: Derrick Rose. In 2008, the Bulls had the luck and the winning lottery ball to land the #1 pick in the draft. They used it to select a 20-year-old point guard who played as if the future already belonged to him. Rose's arrival was a breath of fresh air for a franchise coming off a lost, directionless season. For Ben Gordon, it was like getting a lifeline at just the right moment. Rose's presence didn't just bring energy and leadership, it gave him exactly what he needed: a playmaker capable of drawing defenses and freeing him to do what he did best: score. That chemistry showed immediately. Gordon once again averaged over 20 points per game, 20.7 to be exact, shooting 41% from 3, his signature mark. Rose opened the floor with his speed and explosiveness, and Gordon punished from the outside with his usual calm. The contrast with the previous year was brutal. In 2007-08, Chicago had finished with a disastrous 33-49 record and no playoffs. With Rose leading and Gordon at his best, the Bulls made it back to the postseason, even if only as the 7th seed in the East. But that didn't matter. They had recovered their identity, their confidence, and above all, their edge. That team was an underdog, yes, but a dangerous one. It had fearless youth, a rookie who played like a veteran, and a silent shooter who didn't blink in the clutch. It was the perfect mix to make noise in the playoffs. And what came next was far more than noise. It was an earthquake still remembered today as one of the most epic series in NBA history. The true peak of Ben Gordon's career came in the 2009 playoffs. The Bulls entered as the 7th seed in the East, set to face the defending champions, the Boston Celtics. On paper, the series was supposed to be a formality, but there was one key detail: Kevin Garnett was injured, and that crack in Boston's armor was enough to give Chicago a reason to bite. What happened in Game 1 was historic. Derrick Rose, just 20 years old, made his playoff debut with 36 points and 11 assists, tying a record that had belonged to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for decades. And right beside him, as if they were two seasoned veterans, was was Ben Gordon. His 20 points, many of them in clutch moments, were the perfect complement to seal the Bulls' first road playoff win since the Michael Jordan era, a stat that gave the victory enormous symbolic weight. Chicago was making noise on the big stage again. That first blow wasn't just a game one, it was a statement that the series wouldn't be easy for Boston. The Bulls, young and underestimated, played like they had nothing to lose. Rose lit the spark with his speed, and Gordon, with his unshakable expression, delivered silent daggers that kept the team alive in every closing stretch. That mix of electricity and cold-blooded calm turned TD Garden into a battlefield from the opening minute. No one expected it, but the truth was clear. Chicago had come to fight. And in the middle of that storm, Ben Gordon was starting to emerge as the shooter who would turn this series into an unforgettable classic. If the first game had been Rose's stage, the second became the ring where Ben Gordon went head-to-head with one of the most iconic shooters in history, Ray Allen. What happened that night was a shooting clinic, an exchange of long-range artillery that turned a simple game into an instant classic. Gordon caught fire in spectacular fashion, 42 points, hitting impossible threes that kept the Bulls alive every time the Celtics tried to pull away. Allen answered with a masterpiece of his own. 30 of his points came in the second half, capped by a buzzer-beating three that sealed Boston's win. It was basketball in its purest form, two elite assassins trading daggers without blinking, as if the clock and the pressure were fuel, not obstacles. That personal duel redefined the narrative. Until then, many saw Gordon as Rose's sidekick, the perfect complement to the prodigy rookie. But after that night, it was clear he was much more than that. He could stand toe-to-toe with a Hall of Famer and hold his own. With his frozen expression, without taunting or theatrics, he carried an inner fire that exploded every time he lifted the ball. The series, far from cooling down, only grew more dramatic. In Game 4, with the Bulls on the ropes, Gordon came up again, this time with a memorable three-pointer that forced double overtime in one of the most intense games of that postseason. And in Game 6, a triple overtime marathon, his offensive presence was key to keeping Chicago alive and pushing the series to a Game 7. In total, the series featured 7 games, 4 overtimes, 65 ties, and 108 lead changes. It was beautiful chaos, the kind of war that turns a first round into legend, and in the middle of it all, Gordon left his mark. 20 points in the opener, 42 in the duel with Allen, 33 in Game 7 in Boston. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to carve his name into one of the greatest playoff series of all time. The irony was that this was also his farewell in a Bulls uniform, an epic goodbye full of dignity and fire, but one that hid something no one could have imagined. After reaching his highest peak, he would never again come close to that version of himself. After that unforgettable series against Boston, everything seemed set for Ben Gordon to remain part of Chicago's future. But reality turned out differently. In the summer of 2009, he made the decision that would mark the beginning of his fall. He left for the Detroit Pistons with the same $50 million contract he had rejected years earlier from the Bulls. He got it, yes, but in the worst place, at the worst possible time. There lay the cruelest irony. What he had dreamed of as a step toward greatness ended up being the start of his decline. Chicago was on the rise with Rose leading the future, while Detroit was a wounded giant, a team that had lost its identity after the departure of Chauncey Billups and the collapse of the Bad Boys 2 era. The atmosphere had shifted completely, from the roaring United Center to a quiet locker room with no clear direction. For Gordon, the adjustment never came. In 2010, ankle surgery robbed him of part of the explosiveness that had defined him in Chicago. From being an undisputed starter, he was moved to the bench behind Rodney Stuckey with fewer minutes and less offensive freedom. He was no longer the man who closed games. He was reduced to a role player, a specialist, something that went against his very essence. The hardest part was the external perception. In Chicago, he had been Mr. Fourth Quarter, the silent sniper who killed you quietly. In Detroit, he became the overpaid contract, a player who wasn't living up to his paycheck. He went from being Boston's executioner to being labeled a disappointment, trapped between injuries, bad luck, and a situation completely disconnected from the environment where he had once thrived. The contract that had symbolized his ambition turned into a shackle. Detroit wasn't progressing, he couldn't find his place, and the image of the silent assassin began to fade. It was the start of his decline, and the most painful part was that it wasn't about talent. It was the sum of a miscalculated bet and a setting that extinguished his fire faster than anyone could have imagined. Even in his gloomiest phase, Ben Gordon showed that his talent had never completely abandoned him. Although his role was increasingly secondary and his minutes were plummeting, flashes occasionally appeared that reminded the world who he had been. They were sparks that ignited nostalgia, glimpses of a silent assassin trapped in a body that no longer responded like it used to. The most brutal example came in 2012, playing for Detroit against Philadelphia. That night, Gordon erupted for 45 points and a perfect 9 for 9 from three-point range. In just 5 minutes, he hit 7 consecutive threes, a burst so unreal it seemed ripped from a video game. He matched the record he had set years earlier earlier in Washington, becoming one of the few players in history to achieve such a feat twice. For a moment, everyone saw again the Gordon who had set Chicago games on fire, the one who seemed unstoppable in clutch moments. But therein lay the paradox. While putting up those massive numbers, his scoring and minutes averages were already in free fall. The media and fans always reacted the same way. Every time he exploded, the question arose whether he could ever be the same again, and the answer was always the same. In the next game, inconsistency returned, the silence, the 15 minutes off the bench that reduced him to an occasional specialist. Those flashes weren't signs of a comeback, they were cruel reminders of what had been lost, an echo of greatness that lit the sky for seconds only to leave the darkness even more apparent. And while those bursts were enough to keep him in the league, they no longer served to change the course of his career. They were the embers of a fire that had once been devastating, now condemned to flare up only occasionally. After Detroit, Ben Gordon still seemed to have gunpowder left in the chamber, or at least it appeared that way. In 2012, he joined the Charlotte Bobcats, a team without direction, seemingly doomed to be a shadow in the league. There, he had flashes, games where, coming off the bench, he would erupt for 20 points like a déjà vu of his Chicago days. But these were no longer nights that defined seasons, they were sparks in the middle of a team sunk at the bottom of the standings. He went from being the feared sniper to just another veteran on a forgotten franchise. His final attempt came in Orlando 2014. The Magic gave him a one-year contract as if betting on a memory, hoping that maybe some of the Ben Gordon who could light up games with a flurry of threes still existed. But that version was gone. He averaged barely 6 points in 14 minutes per game and was cut before the season ended. He was only 31 years old, an age when many players are still in their prime. The hardest part was the silence. There was no farewell in a packed arena, no tribute, not even recognition from the league for what he had accomplished. He simply ceased to be. The man who had once been Mr. Fourth Quarter, capable of freezing the United Center with an impossible three, said goodbye without anyone noticing. A departure without glory, as abrupt as it was unfair, leaving the sense that his NBA story had ended far too soon. And as the NBA lights dimmed for him, a darker shadow began to grow in his life, because what came next had nothing to do with threes or clutch finishes. It was an intimate, invisible, and far crueler battle, one that even the league's best shooter couldn't win with a couple of shots. And as the NBA lights dimmed for him, an even darker shadow began to grow in his life, because what came next had nothing to do with threes or clutch finishes. It was an intimate, invisible, and far crueler battle, one that even the league's best shooter couldn't win with a few shots. The first signs appeared shortly after his exit from the league: arrests for strange incidents, weapons possession, and episodes where his behavior seemed baffling. For those who had followed him in his Chicago days, reading those headlines felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Gentle Ben, the reserved and cold player in the heat of battle, was now appearing in police reports for incomprehensible reasons. The contrast was brutal. Gordon had never been a problematic figure in the NBA. He wasn't associated with the stereotype of excess, nor the cliches of parties, drugs, or financial scandals. On the contrary, quiet, serious, almost shy. That's why the shock was even greater. What at first seemed like a series of bad decisions soon began to take the shape of something deeper, an internal storm that had always been there, hidden behind his calm facade. Perhaps the abrupt retirement had more impact than anyone imagined, going from a playoff protagonist to being out of the league at 31 without a tribute, without a transition, without a proper ending, leaves a huge void. A void that can consume. Those first stumbles might have seemed recoverable at the time, but in hindsight, they were clear signs that the worst was yet to come. What began as isolated incidents eventually turned into a total collapse. Starting in 2017, Ben Gordon fell into a dark spiral that dragged him through multiple arrests and headlines that read like something out of a nightmare. He was no longer the former player searching for a new purpose. He was a man fighting against himself, with his life unraveling step by step. In just 1 year, he was arrested several times. Incidents in hotels, erratic behavior in the streets, arguments that turned violent, weapons possession. Each report was more alarming than the last. And the hardest part was that it didn't fit the usual script of troubled ex-NBA players. It wasn't about partying, drugs, or money. His case was different, more unsettling, actions disconnected from reality, as if he were responding to a world that only he could see. The hardest blow came in 2022 when he was arrested in New York after an incident involving his own son. That news was devastating. The player who had once been a symbol of calm and absolute composure on the court was now tied to an image of family chaos and pain. For those who had watched him hit impossible threes against Boston, it was an emotional breaking point. The silent hero had become an unrecognizable stranger. In time, it became known that he suffered from severe bipolar disorder and that those behaviors were the product of a mind trapped in an uncontrollable cycle. But at the time, all that was visible were the headlines, the free fall, the sense of inevitability. Each arrest felt like another step deeper into the abyss, as if there were no way to stop it. For fans, one question hurt more than any statistic. How could someone who had it all, talent, respect, money, a future, end up like this consumed by an invisible battle. That paradox turned his story into something more tragic than any loss on the court. Amid that chaos, when his name was appearing in headlines for arrests and increasingly strange incidents, Ben Gordon decided to break the silence. In 2020, he published a piece in the Players' Tribune that shook the basketball world. With brutal honesty, he confessed that he had suffered from severe depression, had contemplated taking his own life, and lived trapped in a cycle of obsessive thoughts that were consuming him. For the first time, his story stopped being a police rumor and had its own voice, his own. The letter was a turning point. Gordon revealed that his struggles weren't simply bad decisions or him being a problematic ex-NBA player. They were the consequence of severe bipolar disorder that had coexisted with him for years. And the most striking part was the contrast. The man, who on the court was Mr. Fourth Quarter, cold and relentless in clutch moments, admitted that in his private life he'd been incapable of finding calm. The serenity he displayed in arenas had always been a mask, a shield hiding an internal storm. The impact was immediate. Many fans who had remembered him only as Chicago sniper began to see him as a vulnerable human being, someone brave enough to speak out about what other athletes keep silent. His testimony wasn't just about him, it brought to light an uncomfortable truth in professional sports. Depression and loneliness after retirement, a void few can fill when the lights go out. But his confession was not a happy ending. Acknowledging it was just the beginning of a long process with progress and setbacks. Later incidents, including the one in 2022, showed that the battle was still ongoing. Even so, Gordon committed to intensive treatment, participated in over 50 psychotherapy sessions, and remained under legal supervision until 2025 as part of his recovery. This act of exposing his wounds, of showing himself broken, transformed him into more than just a former player. It made him an uncomfortable yet necessary symbol, proof that even the coldest heroes can be fighting invisible wars, and that speaking about them can be as important as any three-pointer in the final quarter. In 2024, after years of struggle and therapy, Ben Gordon made a different kind of comeback. It didn't happen on an NBA court or under the bright lights of the playoffs. It happened at the university where it had all begun, Connecticut. UConn honored him by inducting him into the Huskies of Honor, the place reserved for the greatest players in the program's history. His jersey was raised to the rafters of the arena alongside other champions as an eternal reminder of the young man who had led the team to the 2004 national title. The moment was deeply symbolic. The same arena that had witnessed his rise 2 decades earlier now welcomed him back, carrying the scars of a difficult life, but also the strength of someone still standing. The press quickly highlighted the contrast. The same player who had once made headlines for violent incidents and arrests was now standing before a crowd that rose to its feet to applaud him, celebrating not just the college champion, but the man who had survived his own storm. During the ceremony, a journalist asked him bluntly if he was in a good place now, if he had managed to find peace after so many years of darkness. His answer, simple yet powerful, moved everyone. He said yes, he was at peace, his family was doing well, and he had learned how important it was to talk about the hard moments. That confession, in that context, carried enormous weight. It came from the same person who, in 2020, had publicly admitted he had once thought about ending his life, now saying he was healthy and at peace. That moment was more than just a sports tribute. It was an echo for the entire basketball community and beyond. Proof that you can fall, lose everything, and still find your way back to being celebrated. For many, seeing him there was more moving than any of his 40-point nights because it wasn't about stats anymore, it was about survival. Gordon was being honored not only for his three-pointers, but for having endured when it seemed there was nothing left. Ben Gordon's story isn't the typical one we hear about an NBA star. It didn't end with a championship ring, a farewell ovation, or a final glorious dance. It ended with silences, painful falls, and invisible battles that nearly consumed him entirely, and yet there he is, standing, scarred, but with the dignity of someone who dared to speak what others keep silent. His career is an uncomfortable reminder of how fragile glory can be. One day you're Mr. Fourth Quarter, the silent assassin taking down giants with impossible threes. The next, you're a man lost in police headlines, trapped inside your own mind. That duality is what makes his story hurt so much, but also what makes it matter so much. Today, with his jersey hanging at UConn and with him himself saying he is finally at peace, one question lingers. What might Ben Gordon have become if that internal war hadn't trapped him? Perhaps we'll never know. The only certainty is that on the court, he was an unstoppable shooter, and off it, a survivor. And maybe that mixture, glory and pain, threes and scars, is the true measure of his legacy. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.